order, please, if you'd stand for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Approval of minutes. Are there any changes or questions regarding the minutes from our March 19th meeting? Hearing none, we'll accept them as presented. Open forum. At this time, we'd like to give our audience an opportunity to ask any questions about this agenda or about operations within the school district. Personnel matters will not be addressed in public session. Comments may be recorded and responded to by the Board of Education or the superintendent within 24 to 48 hours. We ask that you introduce yourself to the board, state if you are a district resident, and that you keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. Hearing none, we'll make the essentially same offer to members of the Trumansburg Teachers Association and the Trumansburg Support Staff Bargaining Unit. If at this time you'd like to share any comments or concerns or questions with the Board of Education directly, we'd be delighted to hear from you. Okay. Hearing none, we'll proceed. Agenda changes. There are changes to item 13N and O. A new language has been inserted, essentially identifying dates. So if you'd note that. And then there are two new items, item T and U under new business also, which we will address later in the meeting. Okay. Presentations. Hunt Architects, scope of our smart bond proposal. Ms. Bell?
Correct. So welcome this evening to Ryan Garrison from Hunt. Come on over. Ryan is here this evening to discuss with the public and the board the scope of our Smart School Bond Act.
So, my name is Ryan Garrison. I work with Hunt Engineering, and we're working with the district on both the capital project and the Smart Schools Bond Act submission, which are going to kind of play together. The goal tonight is to just express to you guys what our preliminary scope is for the Smart Schools Bond Act, what the Smart Schools Bond Act can pay for, what your district's allocation is. I'm going to cover all this stuff so that you guys can approve the plan preliminarily. So in 2014, the governor had an initiative to set aside $2 billion statewide for technology use and gave each district an allocation. Trumansburg, their allocation is $1.1 million roughly. There's no expiration on these funds, and it requires a detailed investment plan to submit to the state. So just to talk about the process a little bit, the Smart Schools Bond Act investment plan, which contains all the scope for your district's allocation, is primarily fed from the district's instructional technology plan, which it has on file, I think annually with the state. That gets submitted to the Regional Information Center and to SED, and is put on file. And then that obviously plays into what the scope is for the investment plan, but also the 2015 building condition survey and your 5-year plan, which was also submitted to the state and gets incorporated into the investment plan. Once you have that, we basically have to have community involvement in a public hearing. So we've done that a couple of different ways. First off, there will be a public hearing at the second and final approval of the Smart Schools Plan after it's been posted to the district's website for 30 days. And also we met with a committee made of parents, students, teachers, and community members to just let them know what we were thinking about with the scope, which are all requirements of the Smart Schools Bond Act process. Actually, once that's done, it goes to a Smart Schools Bond Act Review Board, which is separate from Facilities Review, just to be clear about that. So two different groups look at the plan. So the basic steps, you've got to have your instructional technology plan, you've got to collaborate with stakeholders, which we just discussed, you've got to develop your scope and present that to SCD in a letter of intent, just like any other capital project. Now, the Board of Education, you guys have to preliminarily approve this plan, so tell us it's okay to present it to the public, at which point we'll put it on the district's website for 30 days, allowing people to make comments on it. There will be an email address on that just people will be able to submit questions to. At that point, we'll take all those questions, we'll try to address them the best we can, and have a public hearing at the next board meeting, 30 days post the web posting, at which point we'll address any comments that were emailed to us and also any comments from anyone who shows up at the public hearing. And then once that's done, the board can finally approve the plan, at which point we can click submit on the SCD portal where we've entered all this information. So that, in a nutshell, that's the process. So what can Smart Schools pay for? It can pay for what they call school connectivity. That's basically wiring, network switches, wireless access points, stuff that's not really that flashy, but it's absolutely required for the number of students and devices that are out there. Classroom technology, so stuff like smart boards, assisted listening devices, pre-K community connectivity, so that's this vague category they define as connecting municipal buildings to the school's network for access. We see very little of district spending in that category. It can pay for pre-K classroom space, actual buildings. It can replace mobile classrooms if you have them. And it can expand high-tech security within the district, which is defined as video security, access control, public or panic buttons, stuff like that. Okay, so after we submit this plan, there's a pretty defined process. However, Smart Schools Bond Act moves very slowly. That's why we're in such a hustle to get this in a plan and submitted to the state, so that where it aligns with the capital project, we won't lag from that. Because this process is a little bit more unreliable. However, there was some legislation just passed requiring the board to meet every 30 days. Right now, they're meeting maybe every 6 months. So it's been a real challenge to get plans approved. So once we have this plan submitted, depending on the scope, it can either take a standard building permit, so that's a submission to SCD Facilities Review, let them know that we're running cabling and stuff in a building and that it complies with all the local codes. At which point it gets submitted to the state. After approval, we can do bidding and construction and then file for reimbursement. And the reimbursement right now, that is pretty consistently under 90 days from submitting it, so the payments have been coming. It's just a matter of this board meeting to approve the plan. So there's another category for scope, which is streamlined stuff. So if it's equipment, basically they've said you can submit it that way and you can just go buy it rather than go through a facilities review, which is another 10 months. We try to do those on the same timeline. So then you can make construction purchases and file for reimbursement. So the preliminary plan scope as it stands right now, data room improvements. So right now we've got to basically create the foundation of the network. Right now there's some insufficient spaces, so we're going to secure spaces. We're going to properly condition them and do some cable management and some power stuff, because power is critical with network devices now. They're all power over Ethernet. So really that's how phones are getting power, that's how paging is getting power, that's how security cameras are getting power. So there's a lot of power work that needs to happen there. Cabling replacement, so we've got to go back and take a look at all the legacy cabling. There's some new standards with NEC coming out, and NEC 70, where basically if you're putting PoE over data cabling, it's got to be rated differently. So we've got-
Time out, can you just explain some of those acronyms that you're just throwing out like we all know what they are? Because I for one don't know. So just back up that last sentence and.
Okay, yep, so data cabling. So NEC, which is the National Electrical Code.
Thank you.
Okay, so they are adopted power over Ethernet. So power over Ethernet is basically powering a device from the switch, no power outlet required at the security camera. So you're doing it with the data cabling. So as things are getting more robust and requiring more power, you have to upgrade the cabling. You obviously can't install older cabling. So we're going to go back and we're going to redo the cabling and definitely install it for the appropriate devices. It's not so much of a retroactive thing as if you're installing a new camera that's going to have a certain load, you want to make sure that's covered. So while we're in there, where we're doing all the closets, that's a great time to replace a lot of cabling.
Good, thank you.
So sorry.
No, really, no. I like the first way better.
Sorry, guys, I didn't talk this fast. Wireless network upgrades. So not a big number here, but we know we have some wireless network expansion that has to happen in the district. And I'll touch back on this in a little bit. Pre-K classrooms and STEM space. So as part of the scope of the capital project, there's technology in those spaces. So some of the idea was to decrease the local share by paying for technology with Smart Schools, which pays 100% of that. So Jeff Robbins, the principal at Hunt, came to me and we worked through this and basically came up with these amounts to support pre-K and STEM spaces. And actually I further defined that because this was one lump number as $550,000 with classroom technology. And we were calling it pre-K, but that wasn't really what it, really it's more classroom technology for renovated spaces as part of the capital project. So the way we're supplementing the STEM and the pre-K spaces, we're going to do the same with classroom technology in Smart Schools. So try to maximize that. And then again, we define IP security cameras. Very small amount here, but the idea is when you submit a plan to Smart Schools, if you don't define a category on the first plan and you have to go back and amend the plan, it takes a really long time to get something like security in there if you don't define it up front. So knowing that probably the first 4 items up there, are going to be put out to bid and we may see value on bid day, that money could be easily shifted into these other categories we've already defined in the plan to do more with it. So that was the idea, is define it if we can now, and depending on bid day, shuffle that around. Because honestly, with the numbers we carry for bid ready stuff, we have to carry loaded numbers that, on bid day, on worst case scenario, we're not over. So when we see value, if we get out in a good bidding season, we can see some real value there and shift that money over to other things we've defined.
Can you take a moment just to back it up to the timeline? I think the previous slide, yeah. So do these things happen concurrently? Because if it's a long process for the Smart Schools to get approved, and then it goes to the standard SED process, isn't that another 18 months or so?
So yes. So actually, Joe might know the review times at SED a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, they're saying that it's improving because they're doing third-party review right now, but we still...
They who?
They as in SED. The state said that the review times are starting to improve. Jeff, I was having a conversation with Jeff the other day. He was saying that he's seeing some of his other clients start to want to do third-party review, which the state is telling us is going to expedite it significantly. Yeah. But yeah, we're figuring anywhere from 6 to 9 months for a normal SED review.
So to answer your question,
on top of the smart bond?
So to answer your question, concurrently is how we're going to run these things.
Okay.
So we're actually getting this one in first. And now we've got quantities and stuff we can put into a plan. Next, we'll go to facilities, and that probably won't even be too far off. I think we'll probably get that in pretty quickly too, just to get in the queue. And what may change in between that is this legislation with Smart Schools where they're forced to meet. As things stand right now, I would probably anticipate the facilities plan, getting approved even before the Smart Schools plan at this point. But they're about to change that, so we'll see when that timing.
But the idea is
plays
that
out.
hopefully you want these done together.
Yes,
Yeah.
yep. That's our big hustle right now.
Okay.
That's our big priority.
Okay, thank you.
So, a couple other things to mention on the timeline. We talked a little bit about how the board is somewhat meeting regularly. It's a pretty long time frame between meets. The investment plan basically requires the completion of schematic design, so that's quantities, and that, so we've got it to that point. Revisions of the investment plan will require an amendment. I think that last part got cut off. But basically you have to go back and go back to the board if it's a significant change. That's why we have those security and wireless pieces in there. And then just to talk about other funding besides the capital project that we're going to combine with this, there's always E-rate, which pays for wireless and wired networking equipment. That's federal funding. And then there's the annual $35K camera reimbursement program through SCD that I think the district is already on a plan working through annually. So those things are going to continue to feed cameras into the scope, and we'll have to get on E-rate to see if there's any capacity there for some networking equipment to.
Yeah, I think that we submitted something for E-rate for this year. I remember Mike was talking about it, so.
Question, please. Would you by any chance know the qualifications of the people on the SSB review board?
I think a couple of them are, at least one I know is an ex-superintendent of Auburn School District. So I think there are a couple of superintendents and people on that board. But what I can tell you is that I watched a webcasting of the board meeting, and it was just a gavel. So they weren't really looking at the plans. There's a big vetting process behind the scenes up to that, and we trade emails with.
Right, that if they had a staff or people who actually had the expertise and the experience to be able to present to them and then have them choose from there.
Yes, and I think it's tough to say that the people up there, they're working as hard as they can, but I think they're understaffed.
I was going to say, if they're adequately staffed, that would be reasonable, but.
Yeah. So my thought is that when this law gets passed, is that it's essentially going to turn into funding for them to hire people and train people to do this. So hopefully
it will work out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions? I know I went through things kind of fast, and
So we're seeing this later in tonight.
Yes, so there's a language in here later on in the packet for you to accept this scope.
And so at that time, there'll be some discussion of the scope or this is the discussion of, right there, that money
That
being
was
spent
it.
in those categories.
That's correct. I think it's important to point out that 1.1 million too comes from the state, and as Ryan said, it's reimbursed typically within 90 days. So we front the money, but it's 100% coming back to us. So it's not like you're 80% aid.
that's right. Yeah.
Any questions for Ryan or for the superintendent? Or for Joe?
I mean, seriously, if I skipped over anything too quickly and you want to understand further, that's what I'm here for.
I think we're good. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
So next up is Lauren prepares for the presentation. This evening is the budget presentation for 18-19 fiscal. And so Lauren is going to give us the broad overview of the budget, and then it'll be supported in more detail near the end of the presentation with Angie's detailed information around special education.
I am just, first, can you hold for 1 second? Sorry. I don't know why I'm not seeing,
Slideshow at the top, Lauren.
yeah, I'm looking for that, and it's,
Go to the top,
top
right.
Oh, there it is, it's to the, I'm looking over this one.
From
Sorry.
beginning. Or-
You got it. Looking in the wrong place. And is this on? Sorry.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Yay. Good. I'm glad this works because it's a lot easier to follow. Good evening, everyone. We've been through some of the budget pieces. It hasn't, tonight we're going to go through category by category and look at some other areas in more depth as we look at what the school district's proposing for the 2018-19 school year. I want to position myself over here a little bit. It's a little bit easier for me to look at this. Okay. All right, now I'm deaf. Which button must have just hit that one? Okay. Our budget proposition this year is going up to $26,664,946. So what are following in the next couple of slides are the propositions that are going to the voters for next year. The first one being the budget total. I keep hitting the wrong button. There you go. Okay. The second one will be for purchasing buses, and we're looking to use what's remaining, pretty much what's remaining in the vehicle reserve to purchase buses, and a small portion of that will be paid out of the general fund if we move forward and if this proposition is passed by the voters. We have a recycle plan, so we look to replenish 3 to 4 buses to 5, prefer 5 every year. At this point in time, we're asking for 3 to try and retire some of the older vehicles that are in the fleet. And I'm going to learn how to press the right button. We also have a proposition going forward for the library tax because we are the school district and we're required to collect for them. So there's a third proposition, and their budget is going up by $3,566. This shows the history of where we've been the past couple of years. And as you can see, our 15-16 budget was $500,000 under what we're proposing for the 18-19 budget. So you did a significant amount of reductions in the 16-17 year, and 17-18 you've been running a fairly tight ship for the last couple of years and using fund balance. And as we move forward, we'll talk about some of the stresses that are on next year's budget and some of the sources of those funds that are going to help us get through next year. At the bottom, I put 2 different rates in there, mainly because we're shifting money from a capital reserve to the general fund. I'm sorry, from debt service and reserve to another reserve. There's a flow through in this budget, so that kind of skews the bottom line. Taking that $500,000 out, our budget to budget increase is 5.5%. This is an overview of the property tax cap. This current year, our tax levy was $10,808,000. Next year, we're looking at $11,211,000. It was 2.7% without the carryover. We did not raise the full amount we were allowed to last year. So that extra $100,000 that is in carryover, we're allowed to take this year without exceeding the tax cap. It's allowable, so we still only need a majority vote. We don't need a supermajority. but that means that the tax levy increase will be 3.7 instead of 2.7. When we initially came out in February, we talked about 2.7. But we're going to use that extra $100,000 in carryover. I'm afraid to touch this, I'm going to hit the wrong button. But you can see in carryover last year, we had $100,000. So we're now drawing that in and we're still staying within our tax cap.
When you say carryover, Lauren, you're meaning that that money is acting as a revenue, or that money allows us to raise above the normal tax cap by $100,000?
It allows us to raise this year's tax cap by that amount. Because we didn't raise it last year, we can raise it this year.
Thank you.
Another slide showing the effect on a home without Star. Now, there are still Star properties, which the tax effect will be less. But last year, you had a tax levy increase of 2%. This year, 3.7, it's a $700 increase. So, as you'll see under the full value tax rate, it says estimate, because we can't determine the tax rates until the assessments are in. The assessments won't be done until the summer. So when those assessments are done by the towns, all the towns involved, then they send it to us and we regurgitate the rates, and that may vary depending on how much your assessments change.
But if maybe that information comes in after we pass the town, has it to raise and do the
After the village, it's not to do with the village, it has to do with the assessment rolls in terms of the values of the properties coming in. Is that what you, I don't think I understood your
No,
question.
never mind, I don't want to take up time.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
We look at the proposed revenues going into next year. We did take the 3.7% on the tax levy. Our local revenues didn't change very much. Those are the types of funds we get from rentals of property or tuitions coming in from other districts, other fees that we might charge. State aid did change a little bit from our last discussion. We did get some extra money from the governor, not enough, but we did offset what we're going to appropriate in fund balance, so it's under $500,000 instead of over $500,000. Federal aid is fairly flat, our estimate is. We are gaining more in terms of Medicaid revenue, but not enough to want to increase the budget by that. What we're going to do is see a transfer from debt service of $500,000 this year, so the large increase of $475,000 is that transfer that's coming in from debt service that will then go out to the capital reserve for the project. We are increasing the appropriated fund balance and how much we're using out of reserves this year. So the appropriated fund balance we're increasing by $215,000. The appropriated reserves we're increasing by $298,000. Most of that, if not, is the appropriation, is the use of the reserves for the employees' retirement system. So we have a significant amount of money. We're going to take a look at the balances. So drawing that in to be able to offset the local retirement system charges and a little additional fund balance is going to allow us to balance the budget.
The appropriated fund balance comes from where? Can you explain that for the public?
Sure. We basically keep a fund balance similar to a savings account in terms of personal finances that we maintain, and it's recommended that we stay about 4% of fund balance. Many districts go over. There aren't any penalties per se involved, but that's the recommended limit for school districts, not for other municipalities. So we matched that 4%. We brought it down over a couple of years to just over. We're getting on the mark. This year, if we were to spend all of that money, we would end up going down to a little over 3. But hopefully, we have enough margin built into this year's budget that we won't have to use all of that. So it's a cushion that we have. that helps offset big changes in budgets over years so that we don't have to have big swings in tax levies or cuts in programs. This is a summary of the fund balance and reserve that we have at this time. And you can see, for the unemployment insurance reserve, we're using $10,000 this year. We'll probably use $10,000 next year. It's a little bit. The retirement contribution reserve is where we're going to take the $329,000 from to offset the employment contributions for the non-instructional staff next year. If you look at the capital reserves, we're a little over $4.5 million. We're looking at putting that $500,000 in. And then we're tentatively, everything goes well with the project, we may end up spending $1.2 million next year. That's an estimate of what costs we may expend next year, and we have the money in the bank, so we'll be fronting that out of the capital reserve. So we don't have to go out and borrow money yet. Or also for the smart bond funds, as you already heard, we have to pay for those expenses up front. So if any of those pieces come into play earlier, we can use the capital reserve money to start paying off some of those bills.
The idea is that at the end of the capital project, that $3,800,000 will be all spent on our portion of supporting the capital project?
Yes. Yes. So yes, if we spend the 1.2, we still have 3.8. We planned on $5 million altogether. So the 4.5 plus the 5 is the 5, and then we start spending down. So the 1.2 is an estimate. The transportation reserve, we have that $420,000 this year. We bought buses. We used some in reserves and some out of general fund. Next year, we're proposing most of the purchase of the buses will be out of the reserve funds and another $30,000 out of the general fund. And so our transportation reserve will be almost depleted. We'll be down to under $3,000.
How common is that?
I'm sorry?
I'm just curious how common it is to have that reserve down so low.
Some districts do not even have that reserve.
Right. So, in the, if we need to buy new buses in the 1920, it'll come directly out of.
We would borrow.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, we'll look at borrowing. And you used to borrow, and then you switched off to cash, and now you're going back to borrowing. The state aid pays back over 5 years, and your borrowing will be structured so that your state aid will be coming in this along the same time frame that your payments will be going out. Not 100%, but 80%. And then you can see the assigned fund balance. We assigned $245,500 this year. I'm expecting that we're going to replenish that. And then if we apply $460,000 to next year's budget, the unassigned fund balance will go from $1,026,000, replenish the $300 this year, and then apply the $460,000. Will leave us with $865,737. If that all comes to fruition, we would have our unassigned fund balance down to 3.25% of the budget. Now, hopefully, we won't have to use all those dollars, and we can replenish more than what we're assigning. So hopefully, we can get that back up. But right now, we're keeping our budget at a point where we have enough room to handle the what-ifs and the changes that happen every year. And we're going to talk more about changes that happen every year.
So in effect, we're using this as a savings account, hopefully to offset having to borrow money and then pay. Regardless of whether the state pays us back, we would still have to pay interest, which is not reimbursed. Right?
No, that's not the unassigned. I think you're confusing the capital piece. So the 1.2 million that we would take out of our capital, that offsets the capital expense so that we don't have to borrow until the very last moment. But the unassigned fund balance is money that we essentially just have. I used to refer to it as that 4% untouchable. So when the boiler goes and we just have to pay for it, that's where we would go to pay for that, but
So
there's,
rather than a savings account, it's more like an insurance policy.
oh, I see what you're saying.
Well, like a savings account. Yeah, so like a buffer, it's a buffer. And then if things happen that were unexpected and you had to exceed your budget, there are circumstances where you're allowed to, that's the money that you would end up going to.
Yeah, giving children more is a good example.
That's a good example. So it's not where we want to be at the end of next year, so hopefully we'll be looking at, more efficiencies and changes going over the next 18 months and be able to bring in more money or save more money as we look at positions and programs and other pieces. Did I answer everyone's question on that? The state budget is divided into 3 components. You have your administrative component, your program component, and your capital component. And this is a description of the 3. Basically, your overall administration, your central office, and your administrators from the schools are included in your administrative component. Your program is everything in the classroom, think of it that way. And your capital component includes your debt service, your operations and maintenance, your custodial services, your service contracts, utilities, and bus purchases. Now, bus transportation is included in program, but the purchase of the buses is included in capital. Okay, so we'll see that. As we look at the percentage of the total budget, this just gives you a breakdown of our administrative capital and program as a percentage of the total budget. What's, I think, a better tell is the 3-year trend. You can see that the administrative budget increases as salaries increase and benefits increase. And your capital budget, unfortunately, has taken a bit of a cut and remains relatively flat going into next year. And your program areas are where most of your growth is, rising pretty steadily. Any questions before I get into the different departments? So we're going to start off with the administrative component, which includes the Board of Education, district clerk, superintendent's office, business administration, auditing, tax collecting, and legal. And you don't see a lot of changes here. They're pretty much a non-discussion. Personnel is up only because some of the fingerprinting was classified, and BOCES costs went up a little bit in the programs that we use BOCES for in terms of our employee benefits. Public information went down because we eliminated the contract and reduced our outside services in the area. Central printing and mailing's down just a little because just right sizing it a little bit, bringing it more in line with what we're actually spending. Now the BOCES administrative costs, the capital expenses, those are driven from BOCES, and they did the presentation, so that's where those increases are coming from. Supervision regular schools, what we see here is an increase for the curriculum director. And benefits have gone up with $6,000 for the administrative hire. Any questions on any of those categories? The program component, I circled, we have our legal services are split between administrative and program because a lot of our legal issues have to deal with student discipline and issues around the schools themselves. In-service training and instruction, and teaching regular schools, those are running pretty smoothly. The largest increase that we're seeing in the budget this year is a program for students with disabilities.
Lauren, can you go back to the
Sure.
in-service training and instruction? So, I'm not great at math, but that looks like a 50% increase from what was approved for this year to next year?
Oh, from this year to next year, yes, $76,000. And that actually, I may have misspoken. That's where I put the curriculum, just double check, director. Okay. You just don't want to tell you the wrong thing.
I think that on the previous slide, Lauren, you have a note at the bottom that you reclassified salaries of the Dean of Students and the Director of Special Education.
Oh, that would be
So
the
that
difference.
was the
That would
last
be the
jump you
difference.
spoke of.
Yes.
And then on this slide, that increase reflects perhaps
The increase of the Director of Curriculum. I misspoke on that, yes. So this would be the increase for the instead of it being a BOCES service, we're buying another day, and then we are
And the previous slide of 90,000 was,
That was, our Dean of Students have always fallen within the program component.
oh, and now they're in
And
administration.
so now
Okay,
they're in
gotcha.
the administrative component.
right.
And
Okay.
the Director of Special Education was previously in special education, and that salary is also now in the administrative component.
Yes, my
Thank you.
apologies. Yep. And, yes. So the program for students with disabilities, we're going to touch on in more detail. There have been a lot of questions, so I'm going to set that aside for another couple slides down the road. Teaching special schools is down $43,000, and that's because of summer school. We're eliminating the additional summer school program that we added. We're taking that back out. I don't think it's sustainable at this point in time, and we have to make some changes.
The occupational education line is up in part because that is 30,000 of that represents the increase for our participation in the PTEC program. Is that true, Lauren?
Yes. Yes, there's $30,000 increase there, and then some of the other increases in the programs. Teaching special schools. School library is not really a decrease in the library program at all. It's really just a reallocation or recoding of a teacher that is split between the library and instruction, and that's just an adjustment of their salaries. Computer assisted instruction didn't change very much, nor did the guidance. Health services, we had budgeted for the current year for a nurse, and that's no longer needed in next year's budget, that position. Diagnostic screening is only reduced based on actual expenses over the last few years. Psych services are up mostly because of salaries and some additional money for testing on those lines. Social work services, pupil personnel, most of these are salaries increases. Question?
Just out of curiosity, the pupil personnel services, why did it decrease so dramatically from previous year to this year?
Pupil personnel services went from 29 to 31.
But the year before it was 71, and it went, and this year it went to 29. So I get we're talking about the past, but just out
I
of
can
curiosity.
I'll look up
Okay.
specifically. Some of this may be due to some of the recoding that was done.
Reclassification, okay.
Or I'm
Reclassification
also
of
going out
positions.
on a limb that perhaps we, from 16-17 to 17-18, we may have coded a salary to a grant.
That's
Oh,
possible.
okay. So it's not reduction in services, it's how we
No.
encoded it.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Thank you.
Co-curricular was brought, I just think we budgeted a little bit higher, and we're looking at 159,000 this year, so 162 next year. Interscholastic athletics, same thing, we just, going back to, we have a new contract, we know where the salaries are falling, and all the positions are falling. Transportation services are not reduced per se. It's actually a reclassification there as well. We had, in the bus drivers, we had mechanics and clerical, and those are pulled out and put into the garage category as opposed to the bus driver category. Civic activities transfer to other funds. The largest increase in the transfer department is $66,000, mostly due to the food service, which normally we would absorb some of their benefits at the end of the year. This is just more transparent, where they have to show the full amount of the cost of their program, and we have to show the full amount that the general fund is sending to support the program. So it's not new money, it's not new spending, it's just a different presentation. And again, the benefits. Capital operations and plan. Unfortunately, we did make some cost reductions in operation of plant. Joe's on a little thinner budget this year. We did trim back some utility lines, a couple of contractual lines, and so that's a decrease. If we look down at bus purchases, we had $220,000 approved for this year. It's showing $337 because we brought money in from the capital reserves, so our total spending on buses came in at $337. Next year, we're looking at spending $300 out of the reserve and $30,000 out of the general fund. So the difference between the 220 and the 30 is a cut in the bus line for $190,000. Debt service is down because our debt payments are down. And it's our normal schedule, and we planned on that so that one of the reasons we're going to the capital project now, because that extra room can be used for the capital project. We take on new debt. And then there's an additional $500,000 in the transfer to capital fund. There's also $35,000 for safety and security items. Normally, we budget $100,000 for an ongoing cash capital. We cut that back to $35,000. We cut it back to the amount that we can get reimbursed 100% for state aid for those items. So we're losing on that one. An overall summary of the three categories. And again, the increased budget to budget is 7.5%. If we take out the capital reserve transfer, it's 5.5%. This doesn't show the percentage of the total budget. This graph shows the total of where the increases are coming from, or the percentage of where the increases are coming from. So out of 100% of the increase in this year's budget, 39% of that increase is coming from special education, 38% from salaries and wages. Last time when you saw this, I had kind of split off salaries and wages into special education. I redid this, so if it looks a little different from what you saw last time, all the salaries and wages are in one piece, and the non-salary piece of special education costs are in the other 39%. And so the five biggest areas of the increase in the budget were the salaries, the New York State teachers' retirement, New York State employees' retirement, medical health insurance, and special education costs. Those are the major drivers from this year and next year.
When designing the budget for the special education, I just think it's important to, and maybe I'm going to say this wrong, but you have to plan for the most expensive scenario, and that's not always going to be what happens. We don't know what that looks like until we know what the enrollment looks like for students with special education. Did I say that right?
True, and I think that typically when we build a budget, we look at 3 to 4 year trends. And so we did have a trend where it was remaining pretty stable. You know, we would see increases of 100,000 or 200,000, but we are serving a different population right now, and this year we saw a real spike in that. So I think that's what has most of us concerned as we move forward, that those spikes are hard to plan for. And so there's some significant areas in the budget that Lauren has reduced, and that has been done in part to build a small margin within the special education budget. And with careful planning on Angie's part, we believe that that margin may be enough for next fiscal. However, if we have a significant spike again, we will dip more deeply into that 4%, which I call untouchable.
Mm-hmm. And then as far as the percentage increase for salaries and wages, this is a hard question to answer right now, but I'm just curious if that's around in the range that happens every year.
Yeah, because there are contractual obligations, and so when contracts are agreed upon or negotiated, there is trending within the area. So typically, if you were to look at other school districts, our contracts are very similar to theirs. So this is an obligation that goes out several years, but it's similar to other districts in the area.
And for medical, I think nationwide it's about 7% increase annually.
That's
So
what we
this
used
is-
this year. And that's what our premiums and with the consortium, the expected increases overall, 7% is what we based it on.
So this is, Lauren, this is not percentage of the budget, it's the
Increase, it's a percentage of the increase.
Strictly the increase.
Right, right.
Okay.
So I want to be very careful
Yeah.
about that. Thank you for clarifying. Yes. This is just a slide that you've seen before. Employee benefits and the biggest drivers are our hospital, medical, dental insurance increases, and of course our state retirement, teachers' retirement, the biggest increases. And again, the state teachers' retirement went up a couple of percentage points, and the base is up. Employee retirement systems stayed percentage that they collect from us stayed relatively flat, but our payroll is going up. So they're both increasing.
And workman's comp
and
represents a decent jump too.
Yes, and workman's comp, we took a significant hit in relationship to the other districts in the same consortium because a couple of the cases that we've had in the past few years. This is how I've been.
Workers' comp rate went up.
Yes, yes, we're at the highest modification rate.
And that holds for how many?
I'm thinking 2 to 3 more. I can get a clear line of
And then
that.
there's a review
They
again.
phase out because it's a rolling average that they take. This is a 2-year look back from 2016-17 to 18-19. This is just special education, and there are 2 pieces to this. There's the actual expenses and the budgeted expenses. As mentioned, we like to keep margin, a little bit of margin. As you can see on the left, under 16-17, we started out a budget with a little bit of extra, a few $100,000. Try to keep it up. As you can tell by the actual expenses this year went way over, and we're catching up. So when we look at the big increase from this year's budget to next year's budget, what's actually happening is we're having to catch up with the increase this year. So the actual expenses have taken a sharper increase than what we were prepared for, and then we're going to try and end the year with a margin again. And of course the question that arises, is that enough? And we really don't know until numbers come in, but hopefully this year is an anomaly and not something that is a trend. So, and that's something that Angela can address in more detail as we go forward.
So is that projected?
Projected to next year, yes.
So really the 2 key points that you want to hone in on is if you look at the gold bar, if you look at the blue bar to the far left, you can see the blue bar is slightly higher. So that's where we budget. You can see that's the margin, and you can see where the gold bar started. So there's margin built in there. The gap between there is the margin. And then move all the way to the top right, you can see, once again, in the projected budget, we have the blue bar on top again. That's building in the margin. And we anticipate the actual coming in just below that. So we've tried to adjust and still build in margin for next fiscal as well. The stuff in between, the actual, the gold bar, that's where our expenses went this year.
But that's still projected because the
No,
year's
that's
not over.
actual.
Projected. Yeah, projected. Yes.
Oh,
and-
for 18,
no,
19, yes.
For next year,
Yes.
they're both
No,
projected.
for 17, 18, because we're done with that budget year yet.
Right.
That must be projected. We're estimating that we're going,
But we have
that will be the actual.
yes, because we have a good idea, because
Right.
we can look at all the previous months and where we are now and estimate from now until the end.
Which
of
is
the
where
year.
you get your fund balance
Yes.
estimate from.
Sometimes. So in the past, people may recall that I had said, you know, we're building a special education budget at this, and we know now that we have 200,000 in margin. And so if we didn't expend that 200,000, then yes, that contributed to fund balance at the end. And then typically in late May, I would come back to the board and say, I need your approval to move that into a capital reserve. So we won't be doing that this year.
Maybe we should budget for Fiscal.
Yeah, I go for a dartboard too. So I know that there were questions in terms of how, I know. This slide, I struggled with this one, I gotta tell you. One of the issues that we have as a small district is you can have changes. It's like being in a kayak on a big one. I use this analogy. Difference between being in a big boat on the lake and a kayak in the lake. When you're a big boat on the lake and the waves come up, you know, you can kind of ride with it. You got enough. You can take it. You're good. You can stay your course. When you're in a kayak on a lake and the storms come up and the waves come up, it's a lot more turbulent because you're so much smaller. And the changes have such a significant impact on a smaller district. So this is the hard. It's very difficult. Actually, I'm trying to make it clear. If I'm going to work from left to right to try and explain what happened between last year, coming into this year, and going into next year. So starting in the left, we have instructional salaries went up. Now these are increases. These aren't dollars. These are the increases. Our instructional salaries went up $241,000. Well, they went up for a couple of reasons. We had our standard contractual increases. We had retro payments for 2 years. We also added a high school teacher, special education teacher. We ended up adding 3 more monitors. We also traded a monitor for TA, that's not on the list. We had BOCES increases because of the programs, and we're going to talk in more detail about which programs and why that was, because that's a significant increase. And then the tuition and other services for the students that moved into the district. So that's just going from last year to this year. That's what happened. That's what's happening. And when we look at next year, we still have some salary increases. We won't have to pay the retro out this next year, so that comes down, which is good. We still have salary increases for non-instructional. We did include 1 additional monitor in the budget, and back when we did this in March, we were expecting BOCES services to increase yet again. So our budget is going up over $1 million, $1,068,000. But if you look, we have actual increases of $683,000 coming into this year, and another projection going into next year. Now, some of the increase, going back to the yellow and working down, some of the increase is due to recodes. We had some of our monitors that were put into the special education categories, and they need to come into they're put in general education, they need to come into special education. So it's just a budget shift, it's not a real increase. Just changing from one side to another, or from one code to another. So overall, when we look at the increases for this year, once we take in those real increases and add the budget change for the recodes of the monitors, and our expectation going into next year, we're legitimately going up in expenses well over $1 million into next year. And the budget is catching up. So our budget's up $1,068,000.
63.
63?
No,
Yep.
63.
63,830. Now, if we take a look at the section in the middle, below the salmon color. Angie's been working really hard. We've been going through meetings, and she's been looking at the cases and what we can do. what our expectations are for students for next year. And they are changing. It's a constant changing. It's that variability. So as it looks at now, we're going to be able to move forward with fewer monitors than we originally projected. And we're going to be able to move forward with fewer BOCES placements than we projected in March. And then the question is, well, why don't you lower the budget? Well, that gets into that margin we're talking about. We need that extra money as a cushion because we don't know what's going to happen next year. And you can see the volatility in the budget.
So I just want to make a public statement, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So as an administrative team, we discussed several times, obviously public presentation saying that we may decrease the budget by 4 school monitors. Some of you may know or may not know that our monitor positions turn over very frequently. So as a team, we decided that it's premature to have conversations with 4 employees in those roles at this time. So it's not late enough in the school year, because if we truly do reduce by 4 monitors, by the time we get to the end of June or the end of the school year, those 4 people may not be the same 4 people that I speak to today. So I'm putting that out there because I don't want it to appear that we're being insensitive and we're not having conversations with those individuals. But at this point, those individuals could change. So
we're also anticipating a retirement and resignations possibly at the end of the year.
And speaking of, I guess, on the same subject,
experience.
from a different perspective, having sat through for the last 8 years the talk of cutting 4 monitors or 5 monitors, we've done that in every budget that I can remember for the last 6 years or 7 years, and we've added them back in before the end of the first month of school. So I guess in some sense I applaud the fact that we're not really talking about taking the money out of the budget, because inevitably it just goes back in. I mean, at least recent history says it's going to go back in.
Okay, well, at this point, we have about $220,000 from what we thought we were going to spend a month ago, that if we do have to add the monitors in, we have that margin in the budget, that we can absorb it. So it's there, and we're not taking it out, we're not decreasing. And then both sides, if we don't spend it, we don't use the fund balance. And if we have to spend it, the fund balance is allocated. So we're covering ourselves in terms of having the higher budget number, and hopefully we'll be able to absorb it, maybe not add all the monitors come the first week of school. Don't know. Are there any questions on this?
I hate to be the one asking all the questions, but
Okay.
I have a ton. So how many students does this expenditure?
That's going to be answered in
That-
I think it'll be answered in
Yeah,
All right,
so
I'll wait.
let us step forward into
Okay,
into
cool.
the next section.
Can I
and
just
then-
ask I just want to ask a
Yeah.
general question since
Sure.
we've seen this slide now. So knowing that the appropriate fund balance for next year, we might not use all of that. So we're going down below 4%, like 3.2, roughly 3.2% of the fund balance. Are we cutting it too thin? You know, I mean, truthfully, if we're cutting operations and maintenance by about 87,000, we're reducing fund balance down to 3.2. You know, I think Angie's done a great job with anticipating the changes with special ed. It just feels thin to me. I mean, everything that we've heard, it just feels
It is.
thin. Is that the responsible thing for us to do right now with what we've seen with special education?
So I think looking forward, and if we plan for 3 years ahead, this is a manageable year. Next year, we may be forced to go over the cap if things continue to.
But should we be more proactive? And should we keep it at closer to that 4% and be more proactive?
How so?
I mean, should we be cutting O&M that close? I mean, should we be having more of a a margin of error in special education so that we, can cover that without going down.
So I think that moving forward for this next fiscal, as presented, is safe and manageable. I think going forward the following year, we'll have a better sense of whether or not these increases in special education are a trend. Some of the reductions in O&M are not ideal, but they are manageable. Like there was, Lauren, correct me on this number because I'm not as close to them anymore, but for example, the playground was maybe 40,000. So we don't need to put in a new playground. So right there's a reduction of 40,000. So that looks like a big number. Would it have been ideal in the perfect year to keep that line there and apply that to other projects? Absolutely. But I think for this fiscal moving forward, we're good at where we're at. Moving forward into the next fiscal, really the changes would be in increasing revenue. So hopefully we'll see an increase in the Medicaid revenue, which will offset some of this. And then additionally, if we don't garner more revenue through state aid, then we would have to go over the tax cap. But there's very few options right now.
If we had an increase in this category like we did this past year, so I think if I'm reading this correctly, it was $683,000. Could we absorb that again?
Yes, if we delayed some other things. For example, we have a transfer to capital reserve. We may end up saying, boy, if we really got hit hard, that's an area that's, I would say, one of the least painful, that we may have to delay that and different planning ahead for the second year, third year out. If we have the funds in the capital reserve to cover us through the start of the construction, but if that money didn't get transferred, it would buy us just a little bit of time to plan and do something differently. Or maybe not pursue some of the projects that we want to pursue. So it's a tightrope, but we would be able to absorb it, but you would be giving up or delaying something else.
And I also think it's fair to say we'll have a better picture in a moment after Angie presents, because we did see that spike this year, but Angie has very carefully looked at what she believes will take place next year. And so she believes that we likely will not tap into the margin that we have planned. So
I have planned for the unplannable.
So she believes that there is room already within the stated budget without touching the margin to accommodate some new needs. So she's feeling more comfortable about.
And I think you'll see, Gary, when you look at the slides that I've prepared up there, I really looked at 5-year trends, and the increase that we saw this year was just an increase that I've never seen. I've been in special education for 15 years and I haven't seen a jump like that in all of my years. So if I had to make a guess at it, I would say it's a fluke this year. I think certainly there's a trend up, but a jump that high, I can't imagine that you would see again. Again, it's something that you're unable to predict of who's going to move into the district and what their needs will be, but we did build in a bigger margin within those projections than we did going into this year. If that makes sense.
Okay. And just to, okay. So now I'm going to this is still on there. This again is just a reiteration of where we are this year projected to be in terms of cost increases. And then our 18-19 budget total increase was originally going up to 1.787. We're, again, with those cutting the monitors, decreasing BOCES services, just another reiteration of the same numbers, where we're going overestimating, trying to trim and still cover what we need to cover, and then leaving that $168,000 in the budget. And this is just for BOCES services. Anticipated cost. So it's just a piece of what we looked at. But again, if the numbers hold true and the forecast for the number of students in those programs hold true, that 168,000 is a little bit of a buffer. If we end up with another change, another student, or another demand, then it'll be there to absorb that. And this is just a reiteration of the slide you're looking at that just shows and highlights that we would like to have a margin, and we're trying to build that in, and so we're not reducing the budget because we think our costs are going down. We're going to keep that margin in the budget and have it anticipating additional costs.
Okay.
Here, I'll turn it over to Angie.
So I thought it'd be helpful and useful to start with a little bit of trend data of our overall enrollment. So this is a 5-year picture, not just of our students with disabilities or students with IEPs, but of the overall demographic of our district. I think it's important to kind of take a look at the overall trend, that we're serving a little bit of different clientele than we have been in years past. So what this is data based on Beds Day data. So it's data that we collect in all 3 buildings in October. The 17-18 data is very fresh. It was just released by the state at the end of March. I will say that the 17-18 data for special ed hasn't been released, so those are my hand calculations. I would take those with a grain of salt. I just wanted to get an estimate up there. The students in poverty, the economically disadvantaged, are the numbers that were released from the state. So I think this is interesting to look at our data for 5 years. I've also put the comparison of the state average up there. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is that we have a fairly steady overall enrollment. We hover right around 1,100, 1,000 students, K-12 in the last 5 years. But of those students, of those 1,100 students that we're serving, they're changing within those students. So you'll see, if we look at our percentage of students who are economically disadvantaged, back in 13-14, we were at 30%, give or take, for students in poverty. We are up almost 11% to 41%. State average is still 55%. But really we have 10% more of our students, or 99 more students who are coming into our district who live here in our district that are economically disadvantaged. On par with that, keeping pace with that, is our number of students with disabilities. Again, although our enrollment stayed steady, we do have 29 more students with disabilities over the last 5 years, which takes us up to a 19% classification rate. The state average or state target is 17. Again, I ran the 17-18 numbers by hand, and it was like 19.01. So that could be 18, it could be 19. I didn't put all my eggs in the basket, but it's 19% right now. If I had to make a projection for next year, I'd say we're back down at 18%. But what I wanted to show by this was that our demographic is changing. It's not just our special ed that's changing and increasing. Our demographic as a whole in the district is really changing. Questions about that?
Do you know what it is for the TST BOCES area in terms of percentage of, well, any of those numbers?
That's fascinating. Well, Sarah asked the same thing. You guys must have talked.
Pardon?
Sarah asked the same thing in our committee meeting a couple hours ago. I looked it up. I can get that for you. I looked it up. I always do. I think it's very interesting. I don't have it committed to memory, so I don't want to speak to it here, but yes.
Thank you.
I can get that to you. Other questions? Surprised?
So the state aid calculation is very confusing.
The state what?
The state
aid
average.
calculation
It's
is very confusing, but it's based on these, partially based on these.
Oh, the state aid calculation.
Right?
There's all sorts of different factors. There's foundation aid, and then there's STAC, which is aid for students with high cost that are with disabilities. So there's a multitude of different aids that come in.
Right.
Yeah.
And
So-
some different funding sources, like I think Title I funding, your percentage of money you're getting in for Title I is based partially on your percentage of economically disadvantaged.
Right. So when we see these increases, it also means that we're getting aid, maybe not completely one for one, no?
The unfortunate part is that the aid isn't flowing according to the needs or the enrollments of the districts. At this point, very little of it does. And although it was built with the intention of reflecting enrollment and the needs of the students and the poverty rates of the students and the ESL needs and the special education need, all of those factors go into the formula, but that's basically gone by the wayside for the last 15 years, no, 16, 17 years. So we're yeah, and I don't know what's going to take to get back on course, but we don't get more money if we get more students, and we don't lose money if we lose students.
So the burden really does fall locally.
The burden is falling locally, yes. Oh, I'm sorry, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. I assumed you were.
The second slide is looking at our historical out-of-district placements. So we've talked a lot about the increase and the overall special ed budget. So the special ed budget, just like the overall budget, is made up of three main components. Professional staff salaries, our monitors, and then our out-of-district placements. Certainly there's other costs in there, but those are the three major factors that are your spending in special education. So I think, Gary, this will answer your question from previously, but let me go through it, and if it doesn't, I will follow up with that. This is taking a look going back to 2014-15 up to this year, and then our anticipated next year for our out-of-district placements. So out-of-district placements include our students at Tcsd BOCES and programs, our students at George Jr., our students in residential. We have several students placed at other BOCES. I lumped all of that into any student that's not here on campus or out-of-district placements. And I think at first glance, if you look over there to the far right, it says total. If I were reading this chart for the first time, I think the first thing I would notice would be 14-15, we had 15 students out of district, anticipated 18-19, we have 30. Wow, that's double the students out of district placements that we had several years ago. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the explanation for those increases. The other thing I want to point out before I go further is that we do not cut students in half and have a half a student go somewhere. If it says 2.5, that would be a student who either moved in or a changed program mid-year. So the after the point represents months that they were in that program. So I've talked a lot about our large move-in last year. And I will go into more detail on this, but at the end of, the end of 16-17, we had many students move into district that were high-cost students that were out-of-district placements, unanticipated. When I say move-ins, I mean move-ins after budget season. We certainly know February, March, early April is when we're building this budget. We're planning for things for the next year. We had 8 students that moved in from April of 17 to August of 17, so late in the school year or over the summer, that were out of district placements. I think it's important to note that these are lateral placements. These are students who hadn't been here on campus. John, Jeannie, Josh have probably never seen these students. They were placed by another district in a program, and either we just took over the bill if they were within TST, or they moved here and we placed them in a similar program. These aren't new placements for these students. They will move into our district, a lateral placement, or we picked up the bill. So out of those 27 students that we have placed this year in 17-18 in out-of-district placements, 8 of those students, 7.5, or 27% of those placements were move-ins from April of 17 to August of 17. The year before that, 4.5 or 5 students were move-ins. So out of that total 27 that we have now, out of district, 13 of those students have been move-ins in the last year and a half. So that's almost half of our out-of-district placements. As you'll see, it went from 15 to 27 are students that have moved into our district.
And that seems like a total anomaly.
So hard to tell.
It's 2 years.
It's unusual to move in that late in the school year.
Mm-hmm.
I don't yet know if it's a trend of move-ins to the district or an anomaly. It is less usual to move in April, May, June. You know, traditionally families are moving over the summer or at the beginning of the school year to start, their student planning for that school year with their cohort.
Angie, just a quick second. I have a fragment of a memory I'd like to chase down. If
That sounds fun.
any idea how often I'm doing this?
Okay.
If a child were in Hillside at their previous school and their parents moved into the Trumansburg School District, I seem to remember that the previous school would still be charged for Hillside. So that
That's on
move,
placement.
so even if the child has not been moved out of one of those particular placement areas, once they come into Trumansburg, the financials become our responsibility.
It depends on how they were placed in residential to begin with. So students are placed in a residential setting primarily, like for example, we have 8 or 9 students within the Trumansburg School District who are currently in a residential setting. Of those, only 2 are a CSE placement. The school district made that placement into residential. Office of Mental Health is making most of those placements. So if it is a school district that made that placement into residential, that student then moves into our district. We are their CSE, we put that bill. If the Office of Mental Health is placing a student for reasons in the home or significant mental health issues outside of school, which is what happens the majority of the time, then the county's paying that bill regardless of the district.
Okay, that was my corrupted memory.
So it depends on who placed them. If a student is CSE placed, then the district that they live in always picks up their bill.
And how many of our move-ins were CSE placements as opposed to mental health placements?
I didn't put any mental health placements up here. I'm only talking about our special ed
Oh.
budget, so these are all CSE placements.
Because we're footing for
Correct. These numbers don't reflect any Office of Mental Health placements because they're totally out of our control. And they're typically longer placements. Unless there's more questions.
You guys okay?
Oh, actually, can you go back 1 minute? Oh, no. Maybe we can just remember it.
Well, it says back, but it doesn't hit you there. See anything? I hit the back, oh, thank you. Oh, you can always use paper.
And one more thing I wanted to point out with this slide is the slide before this we had talked about, we have approximately 195 students that are students with disabilities that have an IEP. If you look on here, we have approximately 27 who are out of district placements. So what that means is 86%, give or take, of our students with disabilities we are supporting in-house. So it is a very small percentage, 86% of our students with disabilities we are supporting in-house. So it's still a low percentage of students, of our students with disabilities who are receiving out-of-district supports. Okay.
Ready?
Yep, now I'm ready.
Okay, good job. Thank you.
So this slide gives you a little more detail on in particular, the increase. So this is not a historical slide. This is looking at detail of the increase from 16-17 to 17-18. We've heard Lauren and Kimberly talk quite a bit about the drastic swing in the special ed spending and the special ed budget from last year, or this year, that was unanticipated. So I thought it warranted a closer look. An example, trying very hard not to identify students, but to give you an example of, I said there were 7 move-ins. To give you an example of the cost out of 7 move-ins, what do 7 students look like in dollars? Now, certainly we never want to look at our students as dollars, but to explain that large increase in those lines that Lauren was talking about, tuition and BOCES placements, this would be the further explanation of that. The top 7 students are those 7 students that were moving in between April and August of 17. The 2 students at the bottom have been our students traditionally for a while, but were large unanticipated costs.
And as a note, we spoke about state aid. State aid covers very little of these additional costs because the floor is so high for the expenses to get excess prostate. Most of these expenses fall under the threshold.
Our threshold's $37,000 and change, in which you would receive additional funding back. So if you look at the total cost out of many students don't just barely meet that threshold.
So, yes, it is.
So these numbers represent 7 move-in students? They're just numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7?
They are.
Is that how I'm reading it? Okay. And then the
2 below.
Are students that were in our district all along and changed programs?
Correct.
Okay.
We had an unanticipated increase. Medical needs would be one example.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
What is the residential program?
I'm sorry, say that again?
The number for the residential program, just curious about that.
Without, I think, giving in more information and identify the students.
Right. But it's noticeably different than the rest, so it's just a...
It's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week
Right.
residential program, typically
For the
with
entire school
2-to-1 or 3-to-1 ratio.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's less than a year. If you look at student 2 under other unanticipated costs, that student's residential is only about $50,000 under their half a year. But due to the, obviously, intensive needs.
Right.
Being 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
Live there, eat there, go to school there.
So am I correct, Angie, that 6 of these 7 students were basically transporting morning and afternoon back? They're commuting students, essentially?
By that, you mean they go to school on a different campus?
Yeah, yes, but that they are living at home?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Ready to move on?
Yeah, and these were all lateral placements,
Right.
Their previous district had them placed either in this exact program or a similar program if they moved from far away. Did that answer your question, Gary?
Yep, I think so.
The 4th slide here, I had said that special ed budget's made up of 3 main components: professional staff salaries, out-of-district placements, and monitors. So this is a historical perspective of our monitor and TA use. I know there's a lot of information out there. I'll try to go through it and answer the questions. But again, I think if you first look at the totals on the right there, looking back to 2014-15, and then looking all the way through to our anticipated 18-19, we have stayed fairly stable. I mean, there's an up and down of 2 or 3 monitors in there, but we've stayed fairly stable in our monitor use within special education. With that being said, we have had some changes. It's not reflected in the total number, but we are moving from less one-to-one aid support to more shared aid support or classroom support. So by shared aid support, I mean instead of one monitor being assigned specifically to one student, we're trying very hard to pair 2 students or 3 students with similar need and have the monitor shared between those 2 or 3 students, both to increase the independence of the students and to maximize the use of our adults in buildings. Another example would be having several students with needs being placed in the same classroom and providing a classroom aid for that classroom. What else did I say? A large part of that, like if you look at our 28 for this year for 17-18, a large portion of that, I'd say 9 or 10 of those monitors help support our in-house self-contained programs. We are one of only several districts that continue to operate a continuum of self-contained programs in district. We're very proud of that. We believe that it's best serving our students. We have 2 of those self-contained programs at the elementary school and 1 at the middle school. The elementary, we have a K-2 program, an 811, a 3-4 811, and our middle school has Melissa Bryant's local board program, which is a 1211, covering 5 through 8. So because those classrooms are multi-grade and covering students of different ages, those students are typically pushing out of those programs, joining their peers for lunch, for music, for playground time, for tech time, and they're requiring, they're media students, they're requiring additional adult support as they're being pushed out. Because it's multiple grade levels, you can't have one monitor push into 5th grade and 8th grade at the same time. Also, those programs under regulation have to have a teacher and an aide or TA at all times. Another thing I wanted to point out with the increase this year, so I've talked about our large move-in of out-of-district placements. We've also had a large move-in of special ed students in district, so students that are in the elementary school, middle school, and high school. I don't have all of those numbers yet. I can tell you, for example, the middle school over the last 2 years has had approximately 22 students move in. Of those 22 students, 11 have been students with disabilities. That's a 50% of the students moving in. Just in the middle school, for example, have been students with disabilities. Statistically, that should be closer to 15 or 20%. That's the state average, that's our average. We are getting a large influx of students with disabilities moving into the district. Elementary schools had 65, give or take, students move in just this year. I don't have those numbers for special ed, but we do have a mobile population moving in and out. That would be the explanation for the increase from 25 to 28 this year.
We do hear from families that they hear about the quality of our special education here too. So we do hear that some people are moving here for our services.
I'd probably get an email or a phone call at least once a week saying, my family's looking to purchase a house, Lansing, Ithaca, Trumansburg. Can you talk to me about your special ed programs in 2nd grade, in 6th grade? Families are seeking out housing based on special ed services.
Andrew, just one thing up here. In 17-18 elementary, looks like your totals there should be 16. If I'm correct, you've got 4-1-1, 11 classrooms. So
Yep.
So it's 29 total, and then you're reducing it down to 25 for 18-19?
We're reducing by 4. So we're reducing down to 25. We're reducing 3 at the middle school and 1 at the elementary. So I'd be confident in the reduction of 4. I would change the numbers to 29 and 25.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for catching that.
Angie, is there a SCD criteria for, or protocol for determining, or guidelines for determining the need for a monitor?
Absolutely. Not for classroom support, but there is for any sort of 1-to-1 or a small ratio like 2-to-1 or 3-to-1, both in the preschool settings and the school age settings that we adhere to.
And the drop-off from elementary to middle to high school, can you share why you think that occurs?
Hopefully the kids mature.
Are we declassifying kids at that rate?
No. I mean, it's very, very typical. Any district you went to would have more special ed support in that setting. And then as they get older, hopefully the goal is you've taught them those independence, those skills. I mean, we have monitors in the elementary school, several that are working on potty training, on toothbrushing, on basic life skills. Hopefully those have been taught, and it's very traditional to pull back that support, to go to classroom support in the middle school. Very much less common to need additional support in a high school setting in the form of a monitor.
Just an observation from what you've shared with us, and maybe the concern over affordable housing isn't as great a concern as it seems to be made out in the public conversation, because the percentage of are economically disadvantaged is going up, and there seems to be a strong correlation with that in special education. So it seems like, how are they affording the housing that everyone is saying is so unaffordable?
Well,
It just seems like an odd.
I mean, that hasn't been assessed in our district specifically. That could be, that's like a correlation that is made, but maybe not necessarily in our district.
I would say anecdotally, we see a lot of families doubling up. So we get a lot of people living with their grandparents or living with relatives where you'll have 5 or 6 kids living in one home from multiple families.
I can also say we have a large foster and adoptive population in our district.
Okay.
Okay. As we get towards finalizing all of this, I think I said there was a $700 increase, and I don't know where that word came from. It's about a $70 increase in taxes. And I heard myself after the fact going, what were you thinking? I don't want everyone to think that their taxes are going up $700. It was $70 on a $100,000 house from this year to next year. I'm thinking that somewhere those brain waves didn't connect quite right with the right word. So it's only $70 increase. Clarify that.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yes, I'm thinking, let's wait to keep people from moving in or get everybody to move out. I'm not sure which one.
It's going to save a lot of phone calls.
Yes, it's not a 37% increase, it's only a 33.7% increase.
3.7.
3.7. Yes. Okay.
Enunciation is important.
Yes, it is. This is a property tax report grade that will be going out with the budget notice, and it's basically a summary of what we've talked about in terms of the proposed tax levy and how much we need to raise to turn it over to the library, the $118,000, $118,497 million last year. So our total levy, including both the school and the library, will be $11,329,550. We didn't have any exclusions in terms of the tax cap calculations, and we did pick up the extra carryover as we spoke about before. The consumer price index this year was 2.13%, and that's basic stats, going out to the taxpayer. The state is requiring more disclosure coming into next year, so you're going to see a few more pieces. They're requiring us to explain how much we plan on having for adjusted restricted fund balance, assigned appropriated fund balance. I love all the new language. Adjusted unrestricted fund balance and the unrestricted fund balance as a percentage. Basically, the number that you want to really pay attention to is what we're going to be projected to have left at the end of next year is the unrestricted fund balance as a percentage of fund balance. If we spend all of it, we would be down to 3.25%. The schedule of reserve funds, this is new for next year. We've had it on the financial statements, but now it's required that we disclose to the taxpayer everything that we plan on spending out of the reserve funds in the subsequent year. So there's a list. I took out all the extras and just ones we have. So we plan on spending, this is the $1.2 million, our expected expenditure for the capital project, the $300,000 for the bus purchases, nothing planned out of the repair reserve, $10,000 for unemployment, and $329,000 out of the employee retirement system. So they want it front and center. It's going to be front and center on the tax notice, and everyone will be aware of what you have on hand, what you're projected to do with those balances. So it's a new section. And those are the 3 parts that you're going to be voting on in terms of the publication for the budget. I'm sorry. Did you want me to go back?
Yeah, I did. I'm just trying to remember. Teachers don't pay into state, what is it? The
State retirement?
No,
TRS?
the unemployment.
Unemployment, we don't pay unemployment, no.
Okay.
Um,
And we're so.
But we don't pay into the unemployment fund, we pay unemployment.
Right, that's what.
Dollar for dollar.
That there's a
Right.
state unemployment fund, but we pay it into our own fund.
We pay it directly.
Okay, and the same thing with so we're self-insured regarding workers' comp as well?
We're self-insured regarding workman's comp, yes. And the consortium. I shouldn't say self, we're in the consortium, so the group is self-insured. So are you good?
Yep, I'm just trying to dot the
Connect the
i's
dots.
and cross the t, or cross the i's and dot the t, yeah.
So we're not really starting any new initiatives this year. We did reduce some capital expenditures, and the good news is that we'll be able to move forward with the capital project, and everything should flow accordingly. Hopefully there won't be any issues. Get everything passed by the state, and for the Smart Bond Fund, and for the plans that we have in place, and we'll be able to move that forward. Contact information, budget hearing is on May 1st. We'll go through the same thing, and then the Historical Society will have the budget vote. Anything else?
Thank you very much, Lauren.
You're welcome.
Amy, thank you very much. Okay, moving on. Correspondence, we had an email correspondence regarding our Little Blue Raider cheerleading team that traveled to Erie, PA. They competed against teams from several states and placed second in their division, which earned them the opportunity to attend competition in the national stage in Orlando, Florida. The team is made up of 14 girls and 1 boy in grades 5th through 8th. And then shortly after our last meeting, almost a month ago, we had received, actually the board and district administration had received a letter talking about or asking consideration for participation in the Fresh Snack Program. So I presume that that is being looked into. And along with that, we also had an email letter from, again, the cheerleading squad expressing an interest in possibly forming a team for next year. So we'll continue to look at that. Committee reports. Who on the policy committee would like to speak first about policy? We have first reading of the following board policy, Policy 7222, Diploma or Credential Options for Students with Disabilities, Policy 5660, their food service program, and Policy 5661, our wellness policy.
Well, I don't think the changes that were made were particularly. No, it's more a question of cleaning up the verbiage and being able to make it clearer. So, especially with the wellness policy, we had to work through the food services. We had to work through some of their definitions and how they were going to suggest how sugary food can be sold or not. So again, it's just making paragraph A agree with paragraph Q. So, and that was not only within the policy, but especially with the food service and the wellness policy, there was crossover. So we double checked those. And I think if you take a look at them in the packet, it's relatively straightforward. Anything to add?
Okay. So this is our first reading. Our usual procedure is to have a first reading and a discussion, and then come back at a subsequent board meeting for second reading and approval. Do we want to continue with that, or are these changes so minor that you feel we could move to adopt these changes at this meeting?
Yeah, I like the flexibility of being able to look at something when there's
Okay.
only minor changes, to be able to expedite them if the rest of the board agrees. And if it is something that we feel like, we really need to understand this and think about it, then we'd go to a second reading. So whichever way.
Can I ask a question about the diploma or credential options for students with disabilities? Is that something that, Angie, were you at that policy meeting?
No, but I'm familiar with the policy if you want me to speak to it.
And the changes and all that? That were made?
Do you want me to speak to it?
Yeah, Angie, you can, as she said, she is familiar with it, as is our guidance department at the high school level. So it really changed the numbers in terms of what students could achieve on Regents exams and graduation
The
requirements.
actual exiting credential has been around for several years. The policy's been updated to require a written handout in addition to the verbal information that we're giving parents at CSE meetings. We do a very good job at explaining that starting in 8th grade. Now we just do additional some parent handouts that'll go along with that.
It also, correct me if I'm reading into it, but it also appeared to me that they made it much clearer regarding the autonomy that the superintendent has.
I think that's always existed.
Yeah, it was there, but I think they did change some of the wording, did they? And it's a little clearer now.
Yeah.
So do you need a motion?
Yes, so a motion to adopt the policies as presented with their changes at this first reading as opposed to second.
So moved.
Second.
Questions, discussion, concerns? Hearing none, those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. So we're to the second reading and adoption of board policy. Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education for the Trumansburg Central School District hereby approves the second reading and adoption and board policy titled Policy 7522, Student Gender Identity. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second? Discussion, questions, enlightenment?
This was one that we had tabled from a few board meetings ago to be able to take a look and sort of really make the vocabulary reflect what it's trying to say. So in fact, what we did is it's basically replaced any specific gender identification with there. And it works grammatically, so long as there's verb agreement. So that would become one of those words that make you go, wait, did I read this wrong? And I think by the time we were done with it, because you had questions about it.
Yeah.
Did you take a look at it?
Yeah, no, it's great.
It's much smoother. It's some of the recommendations that BOCES made were good, and then we just tweaked it to make it more grammar worthy.
Just get really through.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion? Hearing none, those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries. Thank you. Facilities Committee. Joe? Anything to report?
I think the
Transportation Committee met.
The facilities committee was represented at the Smart Schools committee meeting, so I think Ryan covered that in great detail, what was discussed at that meeting.
Okay. CSE, CPSE Committee?
We spoke a little more in depth about the presentation that you just saw, with some questions and answers.
Any questions there?
No, that was great, thank you.
Athletics Committee? I have to admit that I was there and I'm somewhat brain dead at this point. Too many numbers floating around.
I think one of the main things that came up is that the good news is our modified track team is very large. The bad news is we don't have contractual language that supports a third coach. So the committee spent some time discussing how that's been addressed in the past. So in the past, sometimes there have been cuts to the modified team, or there has been the option for an A and a B team. A practices one day, B practices the next day, and then they split the team for games or meets or what have you. So the committee came up with a hybrid and said we didn't want to see cuts, we didn't want to send students home without having an activity to engage in after school if they were interested. And so John agreed to speak with the varsity coaches to see if some of our students could support our younger children in terms of the warm-ups and some of the practices. And at the same time, Jason would speak to the coaches about, he often sends out an email for supervision purposes, and so we would pay for supervision at meets to support the team so that they could all travel as one large group but still have enough adults present to ensure their safety. So not ideal, but I think we really need to watch the numbers and look more closely to see if this is occurring every year, and if so, at the time of the next negotiations, to maybe look at that differently. Anything else?
No, I don't believe so, but thank you for that rescue. I appreciate it very much. Any questions regarding that?
No, I think it's wise, and it does include more kids.
Yeah. There was also some discussion as to being able to, since they all practice at the track, of maybe sharing some of that adult supervision between the varsity coaches and them. So, Transportation Committee. Joe, would you like to speak to that?
Sure.
We didn't meet, I do remember that.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about the transportation department sending out letters early this year. So we sent them out in March and asked parents to do their transportation requests. And it was kind of just, we took a chance to see if we could get response, and it was fantastic. So we got, there must be at least 300 returned requests for next year, which is great because now we can start planning early. So the goal is maybe, early summer we'll have all of our routes done, and we can send letters out to families early and letters to drivers so that they know what their routes are going to look like. So it's pretty exciting, and it helps us plan a whole lot better. Well, that happens, but at least we'll be a little better prepared. And then we talked about buses, purchasing our new buses this year, and then maybe talking about a plan for, the next couple of years. And like Lauren said earlier, we'll probably have to bond to do bus purchases in the future. And then we talked a little bit about the driver shortage. Last week I had, I don't know how many trips we had going out, but I had 5 trips that had no driver assigned. Just because our number of sub-drivers has dropped by a couple in the last couple of years, just from attrition. Some people moved south, and some people just decided that they didn't want to do it anymore. So now, with the challenges of the number of trips, we're just struggling to find people to drive. So, because the regular drivers can't take a lot of the extra trips. So, we're continuing to try and find drivers if anybody here is interested.
You're holding driver training classes?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, they're doing a new CDL facility over at the airport, which I'm excited about. Hopefully we'll get some new people. Yeah, we do provide training. So.
Is that somewhere on the website about that need?
It's a continuous recruitment with civil service, so it always stays open. Every once in a while, we put a sandwich board out front that says drivers needed. I'm trying to convince some coaches or teachers that have said, hey, what does it take to become a bus driver? So that recruitment internally is happening.
Can I ask a question? So can coaches get trained to drive even though they're responsible for the kid and then use it as a monitor perhaps on the bus? Is that?
Potentially. I mean, if they're licensed to drive with a passenger endorsement, then they can drive. I mean, I have buses that drivers drive without monitors or coaches, so I would think that the coach would be able to drive the bus with a number of kids and maybe not even need a monitor. My fingers are crossed.
There's also discussion of whether we needed to look at a salary adjustment in terms of being able to recruit more substitute bus drivers.
Yeah, I think we talked about, last year, we added a driver that was a full-time sub, so they reported every day. That driver is currently assigned to a run with some homeless students, so we've lost that flexibility in our schedule with staff. So we did talk briefly about the potential of adding another full-time sub driver, just because we don't anticipate that the need to transport homeless students is gonna go away. So, because this 2 years in a row now that we've had this, a full run for the homeless students, so we did talk about that.
Any questions for Joe? Thank you. Food service?
I'm in committee at food service. Rose gave us a lengthy report that was really documented in 3 pages. She gave us a breakdown of revenue through January 31st and then through March 23rd, and it showed increases. So she's managing, I think, the food services increasing revenue.
Good.
She covered many ideas about improving the website and expanding communications to other areas. She's really excited about the farm to school movement, and I had an opportunity over the weekend to sit with her and a friend of mine who has some grant money available, and she's plugging into that. So I'm really excited about the work she's doing for us, and I was really thrilled about the presentation that she gave in the committee meeting.
I think she's really done lots of those work at minimizing expenses and expanding opportunities for things we need to try. So.
Good.
And
Just
she's
what we want to hear.
She's also just fun to be around.
Any questions for Diane?
One of the other things that she did mention is that we're a little below what the state wants us to charge, so that she had to do an increase, which was marginal. But that was, she really didn't have much of a choice, because if the state is going to subsidize this, they at least want us to be able to bring in a similar revenue.
Great.
We can't undercut the state, so.
It's useless to try.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Community Engagement Committee?
So I can give a quick summary on that. We met, and some time ago there was a rap card developed, meaning that it's sort of a brag sheet about Trumansburg School District and what we can offer. And the thought was to make that available to people new to our community, or have it in areas, maybe real estate offices, where people are considering moving into the district, and why they would choose Trumansburg over another school district. So there are lots of creative ideas. I know Diane went away with that draft card, and maybe we'll work with Megan Van Ness to come up with a new draft that will complement the work we're doing and really just brag about us and attract people to the area.
Great. Well, we'll look forward to that. BOCES and Central New York School Board, Douglas?
Not a whole lot going on at Central New York right now, and the only thing from, we're anticipating our annual dinner. And I would urge, I hope the news is getting out there. Tina, have you received anything from Jefferson?
Yeah.
That's great. I keep ignoring you. You are still blocked. Okay, I'll call for tomorrow and see if we can't open something up there. I just
They might want to try my district clerk email address.
Okay, what would that be?
District clerk at Peter.K12. Maybe that won't be found.
District clerk at T-Bird.
K12.
K12.
Maybe
It's on the website.
Yeah, I'll just go to the website and go from there. All right, so that takes care of Central New York, and I guess I will give them a call tomorrow and also get a brief rundown of just exactly what's going to be presented at that meeting, because it is a fairly well-known speaker from California, and I think some of our educators might really be interested in attending. In terms of, what was the other?
BOCES?
BOCES. Most of our conversation recently has been regarding the school improvement services that they're offering all of our districts. And they're attempting to evaluate the effectiveness of any intervention that they are offering. So they not only sit and listen to the teacher explain what she's doing or teach, but they also interview the student and offer options for improving or changing programs, so that for each intervention, eventually, for each intervention, well, probably not for each, but for many interventions that they are engaging in, there will be a pretty direct connection between what the student, how to say this, they will be able to see what the effect, the honest effect of the intervention was, and whether it was successful or not, and then take the next step and improve the intervention for this particular student or group of students if it doesn't seem to be having the desired effect. So eventually they're hoping, and it's obviously going to be a very slow process, to have that for every intervention they do. We'll see how that goes. It's a lofty goal,
Yeah.
and it's really fascinating to watch Barry try to work through it.
So more data-driven results in terms of,
Far more
being able to-
data-driven, but also, of course, obviously, far more hours
yeah.
spent calculating and evaluating. But I guess it's really made a difference. I would like to just say that, I think I've said this almost everywhere at some point in time, but I've been attending the BOCES dinners, which were, 2 weeks ago, for about 23 years. And I distinctly remember 23 years ago, just trying to get a word out of one of those students was almost impossible. And at this last session, they were so free and easy, and that program has just come miles in 23 years. In fact, one of the students, most of them were going on into culinary as their, and of those, most of them into pastry of some sort. But one of them was just taking the class because she enjoyed cooking and hadn't really had much of an opportunity to do it at home. And she's going on straight to college afterwards. But, they're incredibly verbal, just more than willing to tell you anything about them you might want to know. It was really an incredible change when I stopped and thought about where we were 23 years ago. Pretty amazing.
Any questions for Douglas? Okay, thank you, Douglas. Administrator's report, Kimberly?
Yes, so I'll share with the board, and many of you are familiar, and the public, that in early April, the 5th and the 10th, we embarked on a strategic planning process with the help of our consultant, Mike McDonald, and roughly 28 school community members that held various roles, parents, teachers, administrators, community members that were detached from us but live here in T-Bird. And we looked at what we could use to inform and guide our work over the next 3 to 5 years. And at the end of that day and a half, we had identified several focus areas. And a couple that we spent some time exploring in more depth were student success, staff and teacher success, safety and health. We also looked at communication. And so we went away from that process knowing that we have many next steps ahead of us. And so be looking for that communication. I hope to put something out on the web. I need to work with our administrative team, and I think we'll identify an administrator to take one of those focus areas and then work with that group that we had present for that day and a half and identify teams that are willing to look more closely at each of those focus areas and then complete the critical success factors for each focus area. And then at the conclusion of that, hopefully we'll have draft goals and objectives to present to the board. It was a great process. Some of you were there. I don't know if you want to add to that or.
It was really remarkable to spend time with Michael. He's older than I am, and he has more passion and energy than two people ought to have. He spent a lot of time keeping us focused on what do we think and validating that we're doing a marvelous job here. Gave us feedback about how beautiful the schools were, how he felt comfortable, and I really enjoyed my time. Felt good.
Questions? Great, thank you. Jeannie, a report on your recent meetings?
So I feel like I get the happy news. So I was given
What elementary school's all about, right?
was given the opportunity to meet Dr. Dorothy Cotton, and it was the same night as the annual dinner. So a couple of you have already heard this wonderful story, but one of our local parents, Jim Mielty, is friends with Dr. Dorothy Cotton, and she was the inner circle with Dr. Martin Luther King in the Civil Rights Movement. She was one of his closest friends. She refers to him as her best friend. And on the 50th anniversary of his assassination, I was able to meet her. She lives in Ithaca, and Jim took me to meet her. She's a little confused at this point. She's 88, but once we kind of got over the initial introductions, and she knew that that I was a principal and I was there to meet her. She's done work in all of the elementary schools in Ithaca, and so I was able to meet her. And Jim and I are going to be working very hard to bring her here so that our students can meet a living legend, and we're just really excited about it. So she's written a book, and she offered to sign the book for us. So there will be more to come about this, and I'll let you know so you can participate if you would like. But I would love for us to take advantage of having such a wonderful, amazing person in our history living so close by. So hopefully sometime this spring. I feel like we need to do it quickly. So hopefully sometime soon we're going to have her come, and I'll keep you all in the loop. So.
Great. How exciting, thank you.
Right after the picture, she said, "Who are you again?"
John, would you like to give the student report?
Yes, with apologies from Grace, she had to go. Her ride was leaving at 7, so she couldn't stay any later than that. The student highlights. Spring sports are going on, but have had significant weather impacts, which are obvious to everyone. And in fact, that's the only reason she was actually here this evening, is because the track meet that she was supposed to be at was canceled, so she was able to get here for a little while. Our music department has been thriving. They have a trip coming up soon to Boston, and our musical, the Shrek musical, was a huge success. French Club is actually en route home right now from Quebec. That trip was a huge success, and I've been getting updates because my spouse is one of the chaperones, so I get lots of photographic evidence. Robotics team is headed to Detroit next week for the World Championships, and her other highlight was that AP tests start in 2 weeks, so all the seniors are beginning to hit that end crunch stress zone. So lots going on at the high school. So.
What's graduation date again?
June 21st, Thursday night, 6:30. Outside at the stadium because it's going to be 72 degrees and sunny. I put that into my facilities request.
Slight breeze to keep the bugs away, okay.
It's part of my facilities request, Joe, so.
Just snap my fingers.
Thank you, John. Any questions for Mr. King? Okay, moving on to the consent agenda. Are there any items that members would like pulled for individual discussion? I'd like to pull I. Blue Sky Center for Learning. Anyone else have a item they would like pulled or not? Then may I have a motion for acceptance of the consent agenda as presented, items A through N, with the exception of I.
So moved.
Second. Those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Okay. We have a motion for the authorization to sign a contract with Blue Sky Learning Center for Learning, the Board of Education for the Trumansburg Central School District hereby authorizes the superintendent of schools to sign a contract for the current school year 2017-18 between Trumansburg Central School District and the Blue Sky Center for Learning for trainings and workshops by a certified behavior analyst as presented.
So moved.
Second? Okay. So my discussion question is, what is this? And what does a behavior analyst do for us?
So Blue Sky is an organization that several of our students work with, and they work with several of our staff members. They specialize in autism, but we are having them come in to work with all of our monitors in the district and our bus drivers on social skills work with kids, behavioral strategies with kids. It is our goal, it was our goal last year and continues this year, next year, to really train that population of monitors and drivers. They are the ones who are with our students all day. They're on that forefront and really often come to us for the least amount of training. So we've provided several opportunities this year. This would be another to give them some tools in their toolbox to work with some of our neediest students.
And the contract amount for this?
Contract amount, we're looking only to have them come in one time, so although the contract specifies, or the language that you just read said several times, we only anticipate and they know that one time this year. Oh, I don't remember the contract amount. Do you remember the contract amount, Tina?
Okay.
I would say ballpark 750.
Yes, it's in there, I apologize. It's in there.
It's definitely under 1,000.
Is this a service that BOCES does not offer?
Correct, it'd be more in-depth than the services that BOCES has in this area.
Anyone else?
We have had BOCES in several times to work with our monitors and drivers, so this would be a little more in-depth.
Anyone else have questions? Hearing none, those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. On to new business. Acceptance of donation. I have a motion that be resolved that upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education for the Trumansburg Central School District hereby accepts the donation of $2,006 from the Trumansburg Music Boosters to the high school music department for NISBA participation fees as presented.
I think it's supposed to be NISMA, and I'm so used to typing NISBA.
Oh, yes, it should be. Yes. New York State School Music Association.
I'm sure NISBA.
Yes. NISBA.
would approve it.
Yes.
So moved.
We'll move second. Any questions or discussion? Thank you. Again, we had a very generous donation from the Music Boosters at our last monthly meeting. So again, thank you for their generosity. Those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. We have a motion for the acceptance of donation. Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education for the Trumansburg Central School District hereby accepts a donation of $4,349 from the Global Education Motivators Incorporated to the high school for global humanism class trip to New York City to cover hotel expenses. Motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Questions or discussion?
Thank you.
Can you just elaborate
Yeah,
briefly
so
on this, Kimberly?
Jane George worked with a high school class that she offers as an elective, and that group of students prepared arguments to present at the United Nations. And GEM is an organization out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania that supports high school student travel to the UN for that very purpose. So GEM offset our expenses for that trip. It was a great experience for our students. I think there was an article in the Free Press that went into great length to explain.
Yeah.
And I think they're going to be presenting that to both sides.
Oh, nice. Great.
Any other questions? Those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Let's, if it's all right with the board, that we take I'm sorry. D's the last one. We should have taken all these together because they're all from the Global Education Motivators Incorporated. So acceptance, may I have a motion for acceptance of donation. Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education for the Trumansburg Central School District hereby accepts the donation of $1,612 from GEM for the high school trip to New York City for meal expenses, and the one above C, the recommendation that we accept donation in the amount of $1,362.50 for that same trip to New York City to cover transportation.
Except that it was global education, not GEM.
Well, so I just took it as an acronym?
But it could be confusing because of the GEM.
I'm sorry.
The GEM.
Okay. Let me clarify. From Global Education Motivators Incorporated.
Yes, trust me, from one who gets
Okay.
confused easily, it's, we need to be precise.
Good catch. Thank you very much, Jane. So, motion for acceptance of those two?
So moved.
Second? Any questions or discussion? Hearing none. Those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Both motions carry. Thank you. And thank you to Global Education Motivators. What a great donation to support our students. So, yeah.
And Jane.
And Jane, yes, yes. Yes. Item E, motion for the 2018-19 budget proposal. Shall the following resolution be adopted to wit resolve that the Board of Education of the Trumansburg Central School District in the counties of Tompkins, Schuyler, and Seneca, New York, by and hereby is authorized to expend the sums set forth in the general fund appropriations in the amount of $26,664,946 and to levy the necessary tax therefore.
So moved.
Second.
Questions or discussion?
The public hearing is May 1st, that's correct?
Yep.
And the presentation from tonight, it will be similar to that.
It'll be the same.
Yeah. So it's complicated,
Yes.
but
I think that level of detail is necessary.
absolutely. For
Yeah.
the percentage increase.
Yes.
There's a reason for it, and you gotta look into it. You gotta know about it. So hopefully there's a lot of people that show up to that on May 1st. And it's at what time?
6.
Here.
Yes, it's, yeah, scheduled for it. And I think Sarah's point from earlier in the evening is well taken. This is really cutting close now in terms of the unappropriated
Essentially,
fund
the
balance.
work that we had done over the past couple of years to stabilize us and to decrease our dependency on reserves was undone in one fiscal.
Yeah. Doesn't
Yeah.
take much.
Doesn't take much.
Yeah.
That's the scary part, is that, you know, one blown boiler or one bad roof or one, you know, impacts of a group of kids can really make a huge change.
And especially for the small schools.
Yeah.
You know, when over $1 million, you have big hits to our budget.
Yeah.
We're not used to those increases. I mean, it used to be like the 4 areas of increases together,
Yeah,
and this is a standalone.
right. Yeah, and never programmatic increases. It was always health insurance.
Right,
and
right.
those types of
Right.
things that were somewhat in our control, but often not even in our control.
Right.
And this is just programmatic that
Exactly.
we're obligated for.
So it feels a lot different.
Yeah, it does.
It does.
Yeah. Welcome to the Board of Education, everyone. Any other questions? Hearing none, those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries. Item F, a motion for the purchase of school bus proposition. Shall the following resolution be adopted to it? Resolved that the Board of Education of the Trumansburg Central School District is hereby authorized to expend up to $300,000 for the existing from the existing vehicle and equipment reserve fund for the acquisition of 3 full-size buses. Second? Question. Bless you. Question or discussion?
Just once again, that piece about the capital reserve and what this means for the future as far as.
So many school districts do not have a capital reserve for vehicle and equipment purchases. That reserve came out of, okay. That was weird. So having excess fund balance. So the comptroller came in, predates myself, and informed us that we needed to create reserves. So that was one of the reserves. And then we came up with a 10-year spend down plan. So there we have it. We have spent it. So ideally, of course, it's nice to replenish that because it's nice if you don't have to borrow for buses, but it just puts us in the line with other districts. Most districts do borrow for buses, so, and aid comes back over a 5-year period. So it's okay. That's not really detrimental to our
And
financial.
we did that for many, many years.
Yeah.
The state was a little quicker with the repayment process back then, but, so. Any other questions? Hearing none, those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Motion for the approval, shall the following resolution be adopted to it? Resolved that the Board of Education of the Trumansburg Central School District in the counties of Tompkins, Schuyler, and Seneca, New York is hereby authorized to raise the tax levy by $3,566 for the support of the Ulysses Philomathic Library, and such sum shall be paid annually to the trustees of said library. Second? Questions? This is on the budget every year, so. Those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. And continuing with our budget theme for the evening, may I have a motion for the approval of the 2018-19 property tax report card. Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education for the Trumansburg Central School District hereby approves the 2018-19 property tax report card as presented.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Hearing none, those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. All right. BOCES. I'm not going to read this entire thing if you
Okay.
don't mind. I will if you insist, but motion to adopt the TST Board of Cooperative Educational Services tentative administrative budget for the 18-19 school year as presented.
Second?
Questions or discussion? Hearing none, those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. And continuing again now with the BOCES budget and propositions, a motion for, to approve the TSD Board of Cooperative Services election of members to the Board of BOCES, whereas there is a total of 3 vacancies on the Tompkins Seneca Tioga BOCES Board of Cooperative Educational Services, each for a term of 3 years, commencing on July 1st, 2018, and ending on June 30th, 2021. The names are listed below. We have a motion for acceptance.
So moved.
Second?
Where did these names come from?
The members of the board, there's 3,
Oh, okay.
yeah. Renewing, Groton, Freeville, and Newfield.
Yeah. So, like, we have a rotation of
I'm
members.
sorry.
BOCES does also, based on school
Yeah.
district,
Right.
so. Any other questions, comments?
Did you catch that correction? It's Lansing and Newfield.
I don't think it is. It's Groton, Freeville, and Newfield.
Groton, Lansing, and
Groton,
Newfield is
Lansing,
what's
and
on here.
Newfield.
Yeah, Lansing, I think, and Newfield.
That's what's on there.
Yes,
Yes.
Groton, Lansing, and Newfield
Oh, I'm
around
sorry,
there.
it's a Freeville address.
Yeah,
Yes.
her address is Freeville, but
Gotcha.
she, not Lansing.
Yeah.
School.
Makes sense. It is.
Okay,
Did we have a second on that?
second?
Second.
Okay, we do now.
John's office.
Okay. Other questions? Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Okay. And now, for the 3-page resolution.
Go for it.
No, I am not. I'm just trying to find a place where we can.
Well, listen. Worded it.
Okay.
I would just say bond resolution for capital improvements.
I'll do this.
Hold.
Yep, I will do that. Motion for the adoption of the bond resolution, be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education for the Trumansburg Central School District adopts the bond resolution dated April 16, 2018 of the Board of Education of the Trumansburg Central School District authorizing general obligation bonds to finance certain capital improvements consisting of additions to and construction and reconstruction of school buildings and facilities, authorizing the issuance of bond anticipation notes in contemplation thereof, the levy of taxes and annual installments and payment thereof, the expenditure of such sums for such purpose, and determining other matters in connection therewith.
So moved, Governor.
Second? Questions or discussions? Any clarifying comments? Kimberly?
This is for the capital project that was approved by referendum.
Right. So that is for $24,997,422. Correct, okay. Any other questions? Hearing none, those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries.
I collect the next one here.
Okay. Right, yeah, I'm just trying to decide where we need to put this off. Okay.
I think if you just read the first part.
Yep. A motion to approve the WAN Wide Area Network Resolution, whereas the Board of Education of the Trumansburg Central School District, hereinafter referred to as the district, desires to enter into a 3-year service agreement with the Onondaga Cortland Madison BOCES Board of Cooperative Educational Services, herein referred to as OCM BOCES, in order for OCM BOCES to furnish certain services to the district pursuant to the New York State Education Law, those services being light fiber for high-speed communication services in COSER 601. And let me read the dates. Thank you very much. Yep. So further, this agreement is subject to the approval of the Board of Education of OCM BOCES. The contract will be for a maximum period of 3 years, commencing on or about July 1st, 2018, and continuing through June 30th, 2021.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
So this really is a continuation of the services they provided to us in the past, and that was a 5-year contract.
That is correct.
And now it's a 3-year contract.
That's correct. When they put it out for bid, that was the best value.
Okay. All right. Any questions? Hearing none, those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries. Okay. Wow. This is killing my record for short meetings, you know that, don't you?
We're making up for it all tonight.
May I have a motion of acceptance of a construction management proposal from Welliver? Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education for the Trumansburg Central School District hereby accepts the April 4th, 2018 proposal from Welliver for construction management services as presented. Second?
Second.
Questions or discussions for the superintendent? So this is a change from previous construction management services?
That's correct. We put out a request for proposal, and our committee came together, vetted those proposals, interviewed a couple of firms, and it was unanimous that we move forward on the next capital project with Welliver as representation for the district for construction management services.
Any questions for Kimberly or for Joe? Okay. Hearing none, those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. Motion for the acceptance of the 2017 Instructional Technology Plan. Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education for the Trumansburg Central School District hereby accepts the 2017 Instructional Technology Plan for the Trumansburg, oh, I got this backwards. I apologize, 2017 Instructional Trumansburg Central School District Technology Plan as presented.
So moved.
Second? Questions?
When was it presented? Did I miss something?
Pardon?
So this is the plan that is in your packet, and it's a piece that is required by New York State in order for us to move
Oh,
forward
that
with the
was
Smart
the one
Schools
that they
Bond.
noticed that this and this and everything.
Yes.
Okay, then we got it.
Right. So, questions on the plan? The amount of money we're spending on, or proposing to spend on the plan?
No, but thanks to those who put it together, because that's not an easy thing to assemble.
Hearing none, those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. And now that we have the plan, we can go for the Smart Bonds resolution. So, let me see. Motion for the acceptance of Smart School Bonds resolution. Where is a good place to start here? Be it resolved. We'll go right to the resolve that the Board of Education of the Trumansburg Central School District hereby approve the Central School District of Trumansburg Preliminary Smart Schools Bond Act Investment Plan, and be it further resolved that this resolution shall take place effective immediately. Motion.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Okay. So this is the process that was explained to us earlier in the evening that sets in motion the review process so that we can coordinate this with our capital project plan.
And it spells out that the district is allocated to receive $1.1 million.
Yes, thank you. So, yes, $1,122,428, and it does detail, as was showed to us before, where we plan on spending that money. So, questions, concerns, discussion? Hearing none, those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Okay. Now, it's a little shorter resolutions. Motion to accept the recommendation for entry-level salary. Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education hereby establishes the following hourly rate for the 2017-18 school year. Maintenance worker at $16 per hour. Motion? Second. Questions or discussion? This came about, if I am understanding correctly, because we did not do this at the reorg meeting?
That's correct.
Okay.
And this is a new title that we wish to hire under, and as you read further down,
Down.
it's because we're not
Right.
filling the other two.
Okay. Which is, because it's a new position, is why we didn't do it at the reorganization meeting in July.
And the support staff contract was not yet settled in July,
So-
so we didn't establish new rates.
Other questions? Hearing none, those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries. And now, motion to, for approval to create a maintenance worker position, a 1.0 FTE. Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education for the Trumansburg Central School District hereby approves the creation of the civil service title maintenance worker at 1.0 FTE. This position will be applied to the terms provided in the current support staff agreement.
So moved.
Second? Questions or discussion? So can you just give us a little background in terms of why we're abolishing one and creating this?
Joe, do you want to speak to that? So we had previously hoped to fill the position of maintenance mechanic because we felt that that job title more fully represented the task that we need to have completed, and I believe it was on the weekends, right, Joe?
Yeah, on the weekends, yeah.
And we've not been successful in filling that, so we feel if we change the title that maybe we can attract more individuals.
And we'll still be in compliance with civil service
Right.
job descriptions?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Other questions? Hearing none, those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries. And now, since we've created positions, let's abolish a few. Motion for the abolishment of vacant positions. Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education for the Trumansburg Central School District hereby abolishes the following vacant positions effective April 1st, 2018? Oh, yeah, that's the year we're in. Maintenance mechanic, 1.0 FTE, and maintenance supervisor, 1.0 FTE.
So moved. Second.
Questions or discussion? So this is just really the routine process of abolishing positions that we're not filling and don't plan on filling in the near future.
That's correct.
Okay. Any other questions? Hearing none, those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries. All right. A motion for the approval to create a technology services coordinator position at 1.0 FTE. Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education for the Trumansburg Central School District hereby approves the creation of the civil service title Technology Services Coordinator at 1.0 FTE. This position will be applied to the terms provided in the current Trumansburg Leadership Agreement.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Questions? Discussion?
Other than the requirements or the
job description.
I know, are
Oh,
well presented. Nice job.
It's a civil service job description, actually, so we're not
Complimenting the state, you should totally.
I
I take it all back.
And so we are starting with the civil service title. This will be a Trumansburg employee, which is a shift for us. As you know, previously we
Right.
had a regional information center employee. With it being a Trumansburg position, we don't want to limit the candidate pool. So it will be an administrative position, but we felt that if we asked for a certificate of advanced study, it may limit those applying. So we're hoping that this will capture more people. If not, we may come back to you and change that title.
Yeah, and the recommended salary is state mandated as well, right?
No, but it's consistent with what we pay here at Trumansburg.
Okay.
You're getting ahead of us. On the salary. So, other questions, discussion? Those in favor of approving the position? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. And now to the salary for that position. Asking for a recommendation or approval of a recommendation. Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education hereby establishes the following salary 2017-18 school year for the title Technology Services Coordinator at $90,564 per year. Motion?
So,
Second?
second.
Questions or discussion?
Actually, you know what, let me throw that into there. That should be the 18-19 salary.
Okay.
Oh, we're hiring, sorry,
Mhm.
not this year.
Okay, so.
I mean, actually, that just came out. I need to change that amount.
Okay.
Let me
Can I
run
give you
some
a number?
number, yeah, could you?
Yeah, you want to delay and give me 10 seconds?
I need to reduce that by 3.5%.
Okay.
Lauren's gonna do that.
Steal your sheet.
Okay, who can quickly multiply that by 97 or 96.5?
That's exactly what we're going to do.
Okay.
It's for 17-18.
Oh, no, that's too much.
That's
It has to go,
increasing.
Oh,
it
the wrong
has
way.
to decrease by 3.5%. I'm sorry,
Don't give it
I
to
took
me.
our 17-18 rate and increased it by 3.5% for July because that's where our administrators will be,
So
so.
just check this.
But we're starting at that point.
Right, and our hope is that we'll be able to start this before July, so.
Here it is. Sorry.
87,501 would be the new.
87.
Sorry about that.
501. Okay. So, let's amend this motion for approval that be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Trumansburg Board of Education hereby establishes the following salary for the
It's 17-18.
17-18 school year
Correct.
for the position of Technology Services Coordinator at $87,501. Now, a motion for that?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Questions or discussion? Hearing none. Those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Okay, and that brings us back to open forum. So again, at this time, we'd like to give our audience an opportunity to ask any questions about this agenda or about operations within the school district. Personnel matters will not be discussed in public session. Comments may be recorded and responded to by the Board of Education or the Superintendent of Schools. We ask that you introduce yourself to the board, state if you are a district resident, and that you keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. Maureen.
I was at a meeting this evening. I've been emailing Kimberly Ballangini about an opportunity to hear a presentation at Ithaca College by Dr. Shalaby and her work in Troublemakers. I was at a forum this afternoon, and there was an attendee from BOCES that is working on a closed workshop there, similar to the one I attended this afternoon, along with Dr. Jeannie, hyphenated name, that was there today. And when I asked at the end of the program, so what resolution do we need to be able to support these children in the things that Dr. Shalaby talks about in her book? And the response was time and training. So I say all of that and thank you for the resolution tonight that you have to provide the support to the monitors that serve the children, especially the ones that Dr. Shalaby talks about in her book. So it was so nice to leave Ithaca at 6 o'clock, and they said, that's what we need to do, and I got here and you did it. So that was great. That was great. Thanks. I just had a couple of questions, and I'm sorry if I didn't understand this. And what Angie presented in the numbers about the students and the needs that we have in the census in particular, did any of those numbers represent prior to us absorbing pre-K in the total numbers of our census? When did we bring pre-K into this district under this
So typically, we wouldn't just answer questions like this. You would ask and then we respond to you. But I believe in Angie's presentation, those enrollment figures were K through 12, not pre-K.
Okay. And
pre-K, this is our third year.
Okay.
Correct.
And are any of the increases in the services that we are providing, are any of them based on any change in classification that the state has made? That we're providing services to a different classification of students that haven't received them before?
No.
So it's all, okay. And then in the budget information that's in your consent agenda, the New Roots tuition, how many students do we have that go to New Roots? Do we have?
Typically averages around 9 to 11. It may, but again, I'm removed from the numbers quite a bit now, so it may be as low as 7.
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. We'll have to get back
It's
to
in
you.
the ballpark, but I don't remember.
It fluctuates.
And then your presentation in the last slide, you said initiatives are on hold. What initiatives are on hold?
Yeah.
All of them.
Actually, Lori, we had hoped early in the budget process that we could add a full-time media specialist to round out the services in the middle school and in the elementary. Right now, that's a shared position, and we were unable to do that at this time. I guess maybe that's what we're in.
And one last question.
And the rest of the wish list.
In the revenue packet too, the trust accounts, and they're all listed at 0. So where on the revenue page, the trust accounts all say 0. So where does that money live in those reports?
If it's the revenue account, it's maybe because most of those are scholarships and may or may not have gotten the monies in yet for this year if it's new money. Or if it's existing money, there's a balance sheet, which is not in the revenue. So there are balances of cash and trust accounts that are available versus new monies coming in.
Okay. I was just with someone who was wondering about presenting their scholarship and wondered how much money was there, and I said, well, it's in here, but then we looked and it was all 0.
Yeah, that's the new money coming in.
So is that, it used to be on the website where you could see what the trust accounts were, and I couldn't find it.
Yeah, I don't think it's been on the website in my time here, so certainly something we could look at adding.
Okay. That was it, thanks.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
Just to throw it out there, 2 weekends ago was the middle school play, Lion King Jr. If you missed it, the link is on the middle school website. You can sit and watch the play if you are unable to attend that. They did a phenomenal job with it. That's true for our theater department. They do just a knock it out of the park presentation of each of their annual plays.
And
Thank
last
you.
Friday night was a staff slam, and I must say, we are quite good.
As a staff?
Wow, yeah, as a staff, we were great.
Some of us are more sore than others.
Thank you very much. Board forum, we have 2 items. Actually, one now, I understand, is outdated. The District 5 legislator had requested the board participate in conversation around the purposefulness of an armed guard at school districts, and I believe she wanted that result back at shortly after our last meeting, and since we had a very bare minimum quorum, we had postponed it, not realizing that there was a deadline on that. So we can discuss that if you wish, but there is not any purpose to it in terms of what it's referenced on our forum. So given the hour, I'll certainly defer to the judgment of the group, but anyone wishing to have that as a discussion at this point, or we can take it off. Move on. Okay. And then there was also recommendation for discussion along with Mr. King on the role of the student member in the process for selection.
And Mr. King asked if this could be moved to the next board agenda because he had to leave early.
Okay, so anything else from the board in terms of board forum for the good of the order? Michelle.
Well, today was the day for petitions to be submitted for board elections. I did not submit one, so I just wanted to make that announcement, but there were, can you say how many were there?
Yes, there were three.
There were three for
2 seats.
Mhm.
Scott Sherwood, Pat Masters, and Michael Hunter.
So
Did you say those?
Pat Masters, Scott Sherwood, Michael Hunter.
So,
In no specific order. In no specific, the drawing store would need 9 if anybody wants to come.
what does that mean?
The order on the ballot.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
So there'll be information on the website about the candidates?
Yep.
There will be, and they will be invited to our
Already done, May 1st.
May 1st
And we'll have a.
budget presentation and
Budget brochure.
candidate presentation. Okay. Anyone else? Thoughts to share, comments, concerns?
Motion to adjourn?
Hearing none? May I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Questions, discussion? Those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.